Boy, oh boy. The price of freedom is steep.
Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're counting down our picks for the most memorable cutscenes from the Final Fantasy franchise that continue to inhabit that nostalgia center in our collective brains.
Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Tifa and Cloud, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Think we can steer with this?
Worth a try.
Here goes!
It speaks volumes that the story of Final Fantasy VII has endured to the modern day via this series of remakes and rebirths. This 2024 iteration featured a number of notable cutscenes, including one with the likes of Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart at the helm. The scenario is utterly romantic, as the pair ascend into the night sky on a sky gondola, fireworks bursting across the horizon. It's all a setting for love to finally blossom between the pair, as Cloud and Tifa share a kiss. The modern graphics lend this romance option a whole new lease on life when compared to the original Final Fantasy VII, lending further credence to this game's rebirth.
We should probably head back to our rooms.
Yeah, probably.
The Sorceress Parade, Final Fantasy VIII. The old-school Final Fantasy games always knew how to save a memorable sequence for the end of a disc. The Sorceress Parade cutscene from Final Fantasy VIII closed out Disc 1 with some very serious business. Squall Leonhart and his party have split up, in an attempt to assassinate the Sorceress Edea. Their plan ultimately fails, but it's the epic nature of the cutscene that lends the party's plan some serious gravitas. The execution feels large-scale, making the most out of the original PlayStation's graphic capabilities. It also effectively sets up the stakes that are about to be set up against Squall and his friends on Disc 2. Three-way fight, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion.
Don't take Sephiroth lightly.
Noted.
The original Crisis Core from 2007 was a fine prequel to the fan-favorite Final Fantasy VII. However, a 2022 remaster effectively made what was already good, great. This applies particularly well to the cutscenes, which are rendered fantastically well. The three-way fight between Sephiroth, Genesis, and Angeal is a game highlight, featuring some smooth camera work, effective voice acting, and exciting visuals. The musical score lends the battle a separate layer of tension, as the trio battle back and forth. It all comes together as perfectly as any Final Fantasy fan could probably dream.
Enough! Angeal.
Out of my way!
Odin Summon, Final Fantasy IX. Stalwarts of the Final Fantasy franchise are very used to the awesome cinematics that accompany summoned creatures and eidolons. Odin has notched a number of Final Fantasy appearances over the years, but he's actually featured within the story of Final Fantasy IX. This personification of the Norse Allfather rides his eight-legged steed Sleipnir down the settlement of Clera. Total destruction is the end result, as Odin obeys the summoning command of Queen Braun and descends in dramatic fashion from the sky. It's short, sweet, and totally awesome. Sin's attack on Zanarkand, Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster. The original Final Fantasy X from 2001 was the first to debut on the PlayStation 2, and made good on that console's visual upgrades. Fast forward to 2013, however, and both that game and Final Fantasy X-2 received remasters for the PlayStation 3. It was here where Sin's attack on Zanarkand becomes even more impressive, capturing chaos and splattering it all across the screen. The reaction shots and terror of the crowd feels palpable, as Zanarkand is assaulted on all sides, greatly helped by the upgraded score. The Nibelheim Narrative, Final Fantasy VII Franchise. The incident at Nibelheim has been an intrinsic aspect of the Final Fantasy VII mythos ever since the original game was released back in 1997. That epic flashback sequence sets up the madness of Sephiroth, as well as the horribly mutated experiments that have been created by the mad Professor Hojo. The blocky graphics of the OG are charming, while the 2024 remaster lends the Nibelheim narrative an even darker and more extreme aesthetic. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth also increases the cinematic nature of this important and compelling character building moment, but who are we kidding? It's all great stuff. A Kingly Sacrifice, Final Fantasy XV.
Tonight, the dreams of the Blood Royal come to an end.
Spite's all that's kept him going.
Talk about a grudge.
Odin sits the throne. Not for long.
There are few ways more effective at gaining an audience attention than a heroic sacrifice. King Noctis Lucius Callum does just that at the end of Final Fantasy XV. The mood is dark, dreary, and foreboding as Noctis approaches his fate. Players can almost feel the rain and the chill in the air. Despite Noctis defeating Arden in the final battle, his life is the cost that must be paid to fulfill Bahamut's prophecy and restore peace to the land of Eos. Where this game might have lacked in some areas, it nailed in its cinematic storytelling. Ifrit and Bahamut, Final Fantasy XVI.
And I will do my duty.
What are you...
It isn't too often that a Final Fantasy cinematic features two different summoned creatures going at it, but the 16th main installment of the franchise did just that. The fan-favorite summons of Ifrit and Bahamut engage in an epic clash, as Clive Rossfield summons the former to protect his brother Joshua from the latter's rage. The end results are as impressive as it gets, as Clive shrugs off a Mega Flare before getting ready to throw down in his new blazing form. An apt introduction for arguably the game's best boss fight.
First Bahamut, then the heart.
Waltz for the Moon, Final Fantasy VIII. Love stories between leads are as important to the Final Fantasy franchise as chocobos and airships. The relationship between Squall Leonhardt and Renoa Hartley is placed center stage during this ballroom dance sequence. It's a meet cute that harkens back to wartime dances between servicemen and eligible female dates. Eyes on Me plays as Squall and Renoa eventually dance in sync as their interest in each other blossoms. It honestly doesn't matter if you want this one of the OG Final Fantasy VIII or its 2019 remaster. This is classic stuff. Kuja's Introduction, Final Fantasy IX. Sometimes, the big bad isn't necessarily the loudest or the most resonant voice in the room. Sometimes, evil arrives with a whisper in the ear. Kuja's introduction expertly implies his antagonistic intentions, without a word spoken. Instead, the music and visuals do the talking, as Kuja steps out amidst the raindrops to the fallen party members. Queen Braun may think she rules Alexandria, but it's Kuja who emerges as the true threat. And as he ascends out of sight, players are left acutely aware they're in for a rough time. Seymour summons Anima, Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster. It's pretty much a given at this point that a cutscene featuring a summon is going to be badass. However, the cinematic that signifies the arrival of Anima is on a whole other level. This demonic visage of darkness and death is as creepy as summons get. Her hideous toothy maw and covered eyes also lend off the vibe that's almost Lovecraftian in nature, like an elder god from the formless deep. Seymour summoning Anima beefs up his status as one of the primary antagonists, proving to all that he is not to be trifled with. Kefka destroys the world, Final Fantasy VI. The initially buffoonish appearance of Kefka belies what is truly one of Final Fantasy's most memorable villains, full stop. The level of his mad hunger for power is exemplified particularly well during this climactic sequence, whereby he succeeds in turning the world into ruin. The gravitas of the situation is handled incredibly well, even by the Super Nintendo and original PlayStation's comparatively limited processing abilities. The music, atmosphere, and fantastic writing, this is old school video game storytelling at its very best. Tidus and Yuna in Macalania, Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster.
Yuna.
There's a fatalistic sensibility to this otherwise romantic scene between Tidus and Yuna. This lake-bound kiss that occurs near the end of the game is a last-ditch connection between the pair, as the final battle looms and uncertainty beckons. The pop music soundtrack here doesn't feel out of place, rather adding to the sweetness of the moment. Meanwhile, the graphics of both the original Final Fantasy X and its HD remaster from 2013 both service the scene in a wonderful way, tugging at our collective heartstrings each and every time. Sephiroth Supernova, Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake. The Supernova ability may not be the sole property of Sephiroth, but his version is definitely the one that first comes to mind. We all remember where we were when this epic-length spell was first cast on our party. The animation time is long, around 2 minutes, basically a cutscene, hence its inclusion. That sense of growing dread as the planets align, watching them be decimated one by one, all before the literal sun is forced into the faces of Cloud and company. It's ludicrously epic.
Sephiroth.
Cloud vs. Sephiroth, Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Careful now. That which lies ahead does not yet exist.
There are few antagonistic pairings as iconic to the Final Fantasy franchise as Cloud Strife and Sephiroth. The 7th installment's extended universe ensures that the evil of the one-winged angel will probably live on forever in the hearts of the Final Fantasy faithful, and that devotion paid off in a big way with the game's 2020 remake. The voice acting and upgraded visuals bulk up this standoff in a huge way, raising the stakes to a point where we practically forget we're playing a game. The cinematic attention to detail is evident with each sword strike, lunge, and parry as Cloud and Sephiroth indulge in their deadly dance of blades.
Not yet.
The opera scene, Final Fantasy VI.
I am thankful, my beloved, for your tenderness and grace.
Come on, admit it. We know that at least some of you out there have sung along to the lyrics presented for the opera sequence. This old school cinematic for the Maria and Draco event is beyond charming. A cinematic that stirs the soul, all thanks to the music composed by Nobuyu Uematsu and Yoshinori Kitase. It speaks volumes that these little sprites can conjure up such huge emotions for a scene that could have, in lesser hands, been a throwaway minigame. Instead, the opera scene went on to become one of the franchise's most beautiful and heartfelt moments.
Then it's a duel!
The Black Waltz, Final Fantasy IX. The character of Vivi Ornithir from Final Fantasy IX has to be one of the most immediately lovable in the entire franchise. Yet, it's the cuteness of his design and the tragic backstory of his creation that makes this cinematic boss encounter so intense. Vivi's sentience sets him apart from other black mages, and it also allows them to become inspired, to wake from their subservient status and assist the party. There's also an element of tragedy here, however, since so many of the black mages fall in battle, and Vivi is forced to step up to the challenge that awaits him. Cecil becomes a Paladin, Final Fantasy IV. There's no denying that the original Final Fantasy is a classic, and a super important first step for the franchise's eventual dominance. However, gamers in North America probably didn't become addicted to Final Fantasy's storytelling until Final Fantasy II. This was the American version of Final Fantasy IV, and possessed memorable character motivations and dynamics from the start, courtesy of the Dark Knight Cecil Harvey and his childhood friend, Kane Highwind. Cecil's graduation from Dark Knight to Paladin became notable for being one of the first instances where gamers truly became invested in the journey of a Final Fantasy protagonist. Aerith's death, Final Fantasy VII franchise. It was a defining moment in RPG gaming history, a time and place where everyone can recall their shocked silence, the death of Aerith Gainsborough. The emotional resonance of the scene is a constant throughout every iteration of Final Fantasy VII, the death of the little flower girl who had grown so close to the party. The image of Sephiroth descending upon Aerith and running her through with the Masamune sword is a powerful one. It's similar to Zack's death in Crisis Core in that it speaks to the stakes at play, as well as to the mortality within the Final Fantasy franchise. Aerith's death also elevated the RPG experience for younger kids, forcing them to face some tragic, real consequences within the game's storytelling. Snowy March, Final Fantasy VI. It may seem silly, on the surface at least, to have a game's prologue sequence at the top of our list. But then again, there are few old school openings as capital E epic as Final Fantasy VI. The score from Nobuo Uematsu immediately sets the score with some dark, dreadful overtures. Then, Uematsu's score for the Snowy March hits, and we're immediately thrust back into our childhoods. The conversation between Biggs and Wedge may lay out some important initial info, but the visual of their Magitech armor trudging through the snow alongside Terra is the one that lives, rent-free, within our hearts forever. What's your favorite Final Fantasy cutscene? Let us know in the comments.